We are like old men, with old bones and old sinews and yellow fingers and wrinkled feet. We come limping in from the dusty asphalt world, limping to the land of gnomes and tricksters, into the towers of the cool green trees and down the moisty winding path, where the waters of the Octorara ripple through walls of ancient rock and fall splashing into quiet pools. This small room, where the fragrant steam drips and hisses on scorching stones, where the walls remember the quiet sounds of rain on the roof and the scampering of squirrels' feet in the idle haze of summer, where the world outside the window is pale and lovely, like a woman's breasts, accidentally glimpsed while she is bending low, no bra, her t-shirt loose and flowing, her belly tight and her navel like a holy thumbprint in the glory of her flesh. That vision, holy lustful vision, so shimmering and remote. Something you see for just a second, but remember in your daydreams for years. That is how the world is for us. When Mother Nature reveals her charms, very few are looking in her direction. We come out, red-eyed and red-nosed, clean and pink as babies, splashing in the snowy slipstream, in the cleansing icy cold, safe from the eyes of the world. We have such a teacher, in stone and wood and fire, in the hairy circle of men, and in the song that gets sung to the hammer and the wood axe and the splitting wedge here on this hillside. For as long as we are friends, the iron-wheeled world can go along without us. We have discovered a tiny crack in the wall separating us from paradise. We peer with playful, shining eyes, like children, always seeking.
Our group of men get together one day a year. It's usually in the winter, and we meet out at Dick Humphrey's place. In this group, we've known each other, most of us, for a decade or more, some almost 2 decades. But we haven't always been the best of friends, and it's understandable. We work at the same job, we're storytellers, and we compete for the same jobs in the same area. But over the years, well, each of us has developed his own style, his own way of doing storytelling, and it seems like the competition has disappeared and friendships become more important. And so we get together to have a sweat, to have a meal, and to build that friendship.
Hey, how you guys doing, man? Good to... Holy smokes, hey! Let's mob it!
I've known Dick Humphreys for maybe 15, 16 years, and he came up to me at a storytelling performance, and he said, if you're ever in the area, out there in the beautiful rolling farmland of Lancaster, come and visit me. I run an environmental trail out there. We go out and we look for gnomes. And I looked at this kind of interesting guy standing there, and I thought, seemed kind of shaky to me, you know. But eventually, maybe a year or two later, I was in the area, and I called him, and I went over, and you're driving along this Amish farmland where you see the men out there with their horses in the fields, and you see the children walking barefoot along the road, and all of a sudden you come to this grove of trees and this crevasse going down into the earth. This, the Octorara Creek, a branch of it actually cutting down into the earth and creating this gorge where Dick has built his home. I see Dick as a person who is completely in touch with his place. He and his place are inseparable. That land is his masterpiece. I mean, that's his work of art. That that sauna that he built into the side of the hill using the native stone that's available right there, that's his work of art, to build a home that looks like it grew there.
Tea time is an opportunity to catch up on the happenings in the lives of the other men. This morning, our host, Dick Humphreys, ever ready to play the role of the trickster, he's prepared a little surprise for us.
Sort of Dave's idea would make each of us equally happy, you know, the contents of the can, even though it sort of applies to one person, Dave.
Uh-huh.
You know,
This may be the time.
This may be the time.
Just the bad enough to open the can. It's open the can. It's cold out there, man. Open the can.
Yeah.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. So now, what do you remember about opening these?
At the last sweat, David Mettler told a story about boiling a can of evaporated milk to make a sweet caramel treat for campers in an Outward Bound program.
You mean in terms of people feeling? Oh, so he left the watch here?
Yeah, I had a half a teaspoon of it, so I don't think it jerked up that much. But yeah, I know. Yeah.
That was very credible, Dick.
And so Dick has for us that same kind of sweet. Then we sample it, and it doesn't take long before the stories start to bubble up. Stories about sweet treats.
Oh my God!
Oh, look
is
at that.
Incredible.
That's mud. Oh.
Now this is the real thing. This is condensed
This is
milk.
the real thing.
But why is it
condensed-
brown? Why? I thought
Well, I
condensed
guess,
sugars.
yeah, it just boiled for 3
Wow.
hours.
Hey, you know that is.
Oh,
really
man.
good.
Manage the traffic around.
I got a quick story for all you guys here. I think you've heard this one, Dick, out of camp, but it's one that I heard in Japan that I'm particularly fond of. How there was a Buddhist monk, priest, okay, and of course, you know, as an ascetic, you're supposed to give up all the worldly pleasures and everything. But this particular Buddhist priest had a weakness for sweets. And over in Japan, they make something called manju. It's sweet bean paste. It's made from beans. It's really, especially for their tooth, is extremely sweet. Kind of like this stuff. And every so often, this Buddhist priest would go on down to town and bring back this bean paste that he could eat. And of course, all of his acolytes, you know, they couldn't see him eating this stuff because, well, you know, as their mentor, he couldn't be seen to be indulging in such a thing.
Samsara.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So one day he's sitting there, you know, in the back row, and he's shoveling in. He turns around, and here's one of his acolytes watching him. And he turns and he looks and he says, "Now you may think that this is sweet bean paste, but actually it's not. Actually, this is a deadly poison. And through my extreme asceticism, I have mastered the ability to eat this poison. It's part of my rigorous training. So don't touch it, whatever you do." And he puts it up on a high shelf. Well, a week later, so he has to go away for a pilgrimage, and he's going to be gone for a while. And while he's gone, all the acolytes are saying, "Come on, we know it's not poison, it's bean paste, you know, we want some of this stuff." And finally, one of them steps up and says, "Don't worry, I've got a plan." Pulls over a chair, gets up, takes down the bean paste, says, "Here, eat." They're all eating, and they, "Oh, it's so good." They all eat it, and then they think, "What are we going to do when the master comes back? We're going to be in big trouble." The boy who had the idea says, "Don't worry." And he goes over into the master's personal chambers and gets this prized piece of ceramic, a beautiful, beautiful tea set that had been given to him. And he takes it, smashes it. "What are you doing?" saying to everybody else. "We're in real trouble now. How could you?" He says, "Don't worry. I've got a plan." Well, a few days later, the master comes back from his pilgrimage, and he walks in, and the first thing he notices is his tea set smashed all over the floor. His face is getting red, and then he looks around. He sees all of his acolytes lying on the floor, motionless. Oh my goodness, he thought, what happened?
You killed them all.
And then the next thing he notices is this sweet bean paste is no longer on the shelf, but the jar is empty there on the floor.
It's the
And he
importance
thinks,
of
what
an
could have
idea.
happened here? And he walks in, and he looks, and there's a moment of silence, and the acolyte with the idea finally pops up his head and says, "Master, you're back. What happened?" He says, well, Master, well, it was all my fault. You see, we were trying to clean your personal chambers, and accidentally we smashed your tea set. Oh, and we felt so badly. We wanted to kill ourselves. So the only thing we could think of was that poison. So we ate the poison, and we're waiting to die.
Very good.
Let's have a little more poison.
Speaking of
Dick, is this
holy
coffee?
men and sweets,
Yeah. Enough there for you.
a woman brought her son to Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and she says, "Tell my boy not to eat sweets." And he says, "You'll have to come back in 2 weeks." She says, "But I have traveled from the upper reaches of India just to come down to Delhi to see you. And cannot you tell him while we are here? It is a hard journey." He says, "I'm afraid not. You'll have to come back in 2 weeks." So she makes a trip 3 more times, wants to return home. And the round trip that she has in 2 weeks brings a boy in, and Mahatma Gandhi says, "Young man, do not eat sweets." And he says, "Yes, teacher." And on their way out, the woman says, "Why couldn't you have told him this 2 weeks ago?" And Gandhi says, 2 weeks ago, I was eating sweets.
The final round of that story is that when I was in the Peace Corps, we used to eat this chocolate pudding, and I loved it. It was so good, and it was just, you know, made by people that lived in the country. And I would eat it all the time until finally I asked somebody, "What is this?" And they said, "Oh, that's bean paste." And as soon as they told me it was bean paste, all of a sudden, it
wasn't so good anymore.
It didn't taste like royal pudding anymore.
While the stories are being finished, Dick heads down to the sauna to start the fire. There is no sweat in the sauna without building the fire. It is the fire that heats the stones under the sauna itself. And it is the hot stones that you pour water over to create the steam. And the steam makes the heat. The heat is best, most enjoyable, when there's a differential in the air temperature from outside the sauna and inside. 20 degrees outside the sauna, 140 degrees inside the sauna is great. The sauna has 2 rooms. There is the steam room and the cool-off room. The cool-off room is the place where you disrobe before going in to have your sweat.
Yeah.
You got that in your hand?
Let me show you something that I think is pretty amazing. There's this idea in cultures all over the world that part of our job as storytellers is to listen to the stones, and the stones keep our stories for us. This is a stone that I got from the old foundation of the farmhouse that my great-great-great-grandfather built in 1801. Went back and found the old family farm, and my brother and I came down through the woods, and there it was, a foundation a foot or 2 high, backed up against a cliff. And Davy and I picked up this this stone, and we looked at it, and we said, "Wow, our great-great-great-grandfather held this stone."
Really?
And I'd like to pass it along to you guys and see how we feel about this idea of learning stories from these stones. I wanted to tell you a story about my own grandfather. I used to spend every summer with him. He was in the Signal Corps in World War I, and he was injured in the war, and his leg was horribly twisted on his body. And the whole time I knew him, when I was a boy, he was a cripple. But he had a very powerful upper body. And as soon as he got in a boat, he was as good as anybody. He was a great fisherman, and he used to take me fishing almost every day. And I remember one day we were out in the boat and we were fishing, and I had just caught a great big lake trout, and I was just taking the hook out of the lower jaw when I made the mistake of looking that fish in the eye. Mm-hmm. He looked up at me like this. Grandfather said, "Give me that fish." And he took him and he put him in a bucket of water, and that night we ate all the fish we caught that morning except for that one lake trout. And instead my grandfather went around to do you know what a rain barrel is? Like a wooden barrel? Yeah. And he went around and he dumped that fish in the barrel, and the fish swam around just fine. And I said, well, why'd you do that? He said, well, old-timer, I heard a story one time about a man that taught a fish to live on land. Any fish everyone's ever seen do it. Do you want to do it with that one? And I said I did. So that night after dinner, my grandfather snuck out to that rain barrel with an empty bucket. And while that fish was asleep, he dipped out a bucket full of water and dumped it on the ground. And every night, just while that fish was sleeping, he would sneak out to that rain barrel and dip out another bucketful. And after about 2 weeks, that barrel there was a little water in the bottom. I remember the very first day we took him out of the barrel, there was a real heavy coating of dew on the grass. And he laid that fish in the dew, and that moisture was just enough to keep that fish alive. My grandfather got down on the grass in front of me and said, "Come on, boy. Come to me." Darned if that fish didn't start to wiggle across the grass. He said, "Come on, boy." And that fish followed my grandfather all over the dewy grass. Put him back in the barrel, and every morning, just while the dew was on the grass, he would work that fish and train him. Now, at that point, I had to go away for 2 weeks, which is a long time when you're training a fish. And when I came back, what an improvement. I was walking down the road there was my grandfather saying, "Howdy, old timer." And I looked, and there, walking beside my grandfather, bounced up on his hind fins, was that fish, walking around like a little prince. I said, "How'd you do it?" He said, "Oh, just took a little training." After that, that fish could go anywhere with us. We go for a walk around the lake after dinner. Fish would go with us. We get out of that. We even made him a fishing pole and took him fishing. Of course, we had to help him bait the hooks, but he would stand up in the boat. We'd take that little tiny fishing pole, put it under his front fin. He caught a lot of fish. And we had a wonderful summer fishing with that fish. And then I remember one day, this was towards the end of the summer, we were out fishing in the boat, and I wasn't even paying attention. I was looking down, baiting a hook, when I heard this terrible splash. And I looked, and that poor fish had lost his balance and fallen overboard. My grandfather said, "Quick, get him, he'll drown." I was in Cub Scouts. I knew what to do. I tore the shoes off my feet. I jumped down. I swam to the bottom of that lake. There was that fish laying on the bottom of the lake. And I swam him up. I handed him up to my grandfather. My grandfather hauled me in the boat, and we looked. That poor fish laid in the bottom of that boat. He coughed and choked. He'd swallowed a lot of water. And my grandfather had to bend down and give him mouth-to-gill reception. Well, that night, we put him back in the barrel. My grandfather said, "You just can't go against nature. We never should have taken that fish out of the water. We've got to find a way to get him back again." So every night after dinner, my grandfather would sneak out to that rain barrel with an empty bucket. He filled it up, and he poured in a little bit of water. And after about 2 weeks, that barrel was completely full, and that fish had learned to breathe in the water. And I remember on the very last day of our summer vacation, my grandfather took the bucket, and he put the fish in it and put it in the boat. And we rode way out in the center of the lake, and we just sat. And at that hour, the whole lake was like a mirror. I could see everything. I could see our boat. I could see my grandfather, and I could see me. And I realized that the summer was over. He said, "Send him back." I dumped that fish overboard, and he swam away, and that was the last I ever saw of him. That was one of the last times I saw my grandfather, too. He died a few weeks after that. We didn't know it was our last fishing trip. Do you understand? We didn't know. But as long as I live, I'll never Never forget that fish. That's a true story. Do you guys believe me?
Of course, man.
Absolutely true. Whether it happened or not, I don't know, but absolutely true, absolutely.
There you go.
I think of my grandfather. This is Grandfather Smith, Dave. And he had this wonderfully comfortable home that we'd go up and visit our grandfather. And it was in this very kind, peaceful community in Vermont. My mom said that she was 20 years old and away from this community before someone raised their voice at her for the first time. That it was so gentle and inclusive. And so we would get in that living room there, and my grandfather Smith would tell us a story. And the story that he liked to tell, he used a candle, and he would light the candle, and he told of this family that decided to speak differently. They wanted to be different than anybody else. So the father talked like this, and the mother talked like this, and the sister talked like this, and the brother talked like this. And it was amazing sitting there as a boy watching my grandfather, this very dignified, he looked like a Presbyterian minister, but he would contort his face all around like this and telling this story, and the idea was that everything went great until the family wanted to go to bed and blow out this candle on the mantle. So they were all trying it, and then the tagline at the end was that they decided to take it to the person next door who had had a college education and had learned proper diction. So she blew it out, and the family mused, and this is the advantage of a college education. To see this dignified research chemist is what he was for the Marvel Company, sort of transmogrify himself or do a morph on his face. It was a wonderful thing, and your story about your grandfather taking you along in the boat and bringing you in the story, bringing you into this training and having that last mirrored lake experience out there together has evoked that for me.
What I like about stories is how the young, or when you're young, you have such a different perspective. And I was reminded of Proctor and us going there as kids, that there was this lake that we would go on, in the afternoons to go swimming. And this lake has been just burned into my mind, the imagery. And there was this dock that you walked out, and it must have been at least 200 yards long. It was huge. And there was this drop off to the water. And at one point, Mike, our other brother, fell off this thing. And Bill dove in after him, pushed him toward the ladder, and he climbed up, and it seemed like ages to climb up on this thing. But the biggest challenge was to swim out to the well, I guess there was this platform raft or something out in the middle of the lake, and I swore the thing must have been about half a mile, or it maybe a quarter of a mile, I don't know, but it was a long way. And I just couldn't screw up my courage to do that one year. Bill and I were touring up in the New England area one year, and we said, "Hey, let's go back.
Let's go back and do it.
Let's go see this. Yes, let's do it." So we walked out to up the pathway to this lake, And this lake was just a pond. I mean, it was so little.
Oh, no.
This dock was no longer than this room. And you sat over at the edge. Your knee would be in the water.
And then you swim it, man. Then you can jump in.
I mean, you could almost jump to the dang thing.
It's just, you know, at the times have changed. The drought, the lakes have shrunk.
That's
you know,
it. That's
the
it.
water levels come up a little bit. You know, your memory hasn't changed. It's just, you know, the landscape has changed. Your memory's true, I'm sure. But,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You know.
That idea of older parents or grandparents that kind of teach you something. I grew up in a family where everybody worked with their hands. You know, everybody was a coal miner, a steel worker, or a farmer. And so even though I've spent my life telling stories, talking with my mouth, I never feel better than when I work with my hands.
That's doing real work, right?
Yeah, it really is.
You know, while we're sitting here talking, and it just dawned on me, you know, my father worked with his hands, you know, but he would always say to me, you can't work with your hands. He was this amazing electrician. He was a guy who could go into a place, rewire a place, you never knew he was there. He was like Lamont Cranston, the Shadow. I mean, he was so neat, man, that you never knew that the guy rewired your whole house. Yeah. But he kept saying to me, no, you got to go to school, you got to get an education, so forth and so on. When my father passed away, I really didn't start building things until my father passed away. I mean, he didn't know that basically I built furniture, I built houses, and people ask me, how do you see these things? Like, you know, you were talking about that guy who helped him build that house up there, who just knew. Well, I see things, and I'm wondering if now, as we're having this conversation, whether he's like back there, you know, I often ask, how do I see these things? And maybe, you know, he is like giving me this information, you know. It's so hard to explain because I never learned how to build things, and yet you know, I build furniture. So it must come from somewhere. The instinct is there, the knowledge is there. Maybe it's passed on. Maybe I just watched him and saw him how to do things, but he never taught me, and he kept saying I had to go to college, and suddenly I find myself. You know, doing things that he would have done. Maybe I'm seeing things the way he had seen it. So you never. You know,
I find it so interesting though, Ted, because Ray on the one hand is talking about how it was instilled in him that you gotta work with your hands. So he's, you know, you're almost saying you have a sort of a guilt almost.
Absolutely.
If I'm not working by hands, and your love is telling stories, and that's what you want to do. But you, on the flip side, your father felt that you should have better than just working with your hands. So you were never, you know,
I was never.
You never allowed yourself, in a way, to follow that gift of yours until
he passed away.
Until he was gone, and yet, you know, your father's dead and gone, and you're still, you know, saying, "Oh man, I've been telling stories all day. I got to go do some real work."
We were talking about the legacy, the manly legacy of working with your hands and creating. In my family, in my dad's time when he was growing up, his father decided to build a house out in the countryside outside of Akron, Ohio. And my grandfather, like my father in his turn, and I might as well admit, come out of the closet, we're all perfectionists. So he would chase my father around with this. No, my dad got so ticked at my grandfather one time, he actually chased him around the lot with a 2x4. Yeah, which was really something. So by the time he has this whole approach avoidance with work with his hands. So we come to a place where now he's putting up some drywall, a drywall ceiling, with my brother Michael. And they both have the drywall on their heads, you know. They're up ladders, and Mike's standing on a chair, and the blood's running out of his hands. Like that. My father's got nails in his teeth, and he's got one nail up there, and he's going, BAM! Like that. Damn it! You know, and he drives the hammer through the drywall, you know. And then he goes, bam, oh! Like that. And the sweat's pouring down, and Michael's going, like that. This arm is, sagging on both sides. And finally, my father goes, bam! And then with all his might, he hits his thumb.
Oh, no.
Michael said he was watching my father, and this kind of ghoulish wash came over my father's face, and Michael's over there. And my father drops all the nails. He spits the nails out. He takes the hammer in both hands and goes,
There's a telling story, though. It was drummed into him, I'm sure, from his father. This temper.
So your grandfather's temper was drummed into your father?
Yeah.
Or modeled.
Yeah. And it was at my grandmother's funeral. My dad and his brother Jack were talking, and Jack's son were sort of on the periphery of this conversation. And he said that Jack was saying that, yeah, my son was getting to be really annoying, so I lifted up the window and I threw everything out of his window, his guitar. I mean, he had to get to his work, and he had to stop fiddling around. And you could see the damage that would do to a kid. I mean, just thinking of my own son. And my father looked at me and he said, that was what I was always afraid of, to be like that. And I wanted so much to prevent that from continuing down the line. I removed myself. So in a way, I didn't know my father very well. He's not the type that you would joke around with, but he pulled back, and he would spend hours reading, and he would spend hours by himself, but at the same time, he really did contribute to our growing up.
That's true.
He was our scoutmaster. He took us camping every summer. He did a lot.
I'm fascinated, though, not having a father. My dad died when I was 6. And hearing you guys talk about your, what a difference your father has made in your lives. And for the first time, at age 57, I was just saying this to somebody a couple of days ago, that it has made more of an impact on me at this age than it did when I was young, not having a dad. And especially not being able to know how my father would have dealt with getting older, and how would he have handled the aging process. And I'll never know that.
How old was he when he passed away?
He was 42. He was an alcoholic and had pneumonia. And I was 6 when he died, so I don't remember much at all. I do remember him sitting with me during electrical storms on our swing on the front porch, and we would look down over the field and listen to the thunder and watch the lightning. And I did the same thing with our kids when they were young. I would go out on the porch during electrical storms, but that's about the only memory I have of my dad.
I think it's time to hit the sweat, boys.
Yeah, let's do it. Are those calls high enough? Are we ready to roll?
Oh my, absolutely.
All right.
Well, then let's do it.
There is something about the ritual formality of disrobing, entering into the sweat. There's a vulnerability in disrobing your clothes as you enter into that sweat that I think allows for a more honesty and vulnerability in speech. The steam, the mist, maybe there's something about that that's, again, it's a clouding, it's a cover, but it's also an intimacy that gets created through being there together.
that scene in National Geographic where they show the evolution of man.
Yeah,
Like
I
the
know
Crow
that there are
Magnum.
4 other stages.
We really feel that we're there for each other. I feel a great deal of support from the fellas. I've shared a couple things that have been sort of heavy on my mind, and I felt that those men were really there in heart and soul for me.
Really know what he's facing.
Well, I just laid it out for you. You know, there are some guys do some 32 operations a week. Some hospitals don't do 32 a year. You know what I'm saying? So it's anything.
2 hours of sweat, cool off, and sweating again. This cycle over and over. And add to it talking and listening, sometimes loud and boisterous, sometimes things are quiet and serious. You come away from the sweat feeling a combination of exhaustion, exhilaration, and an appetite, a ferocious appetite that cannot be long ignored. It doesn't take long for the guys to pile into their cars and head into Quarryville to the family restaurant for a meal.
I was wondering why it was I liked the conversation and the atmosphere around the table in this restaurant. It's a very humble restaurant. Great food, especially after you're starving to death from the sweat. Why do I like this conversation around the table even better than in the sweat lodge? It's because the guys that talk the most are feeding themselves. I can get a whole story in, a word in edgewise without having to feel like I gotta fight for it. Dick, I really appreciate you having us over for the sweat, and this is my favorite part. This to come to the family restaurant here and have a great meal, and it's in the company of rogues and raconteurs. I don't take this brotherhood or this work lightly at all, because I was really afraid that I wouldn't find it. I wouldn't find what I was meant to do in the world. When I was about 31, I remember I was teaching. It was a great job, really, by all accounts. I was admired by my students. I had a great boss. And this school had wonderful facilities, and I had complete artistic latitude as a teacher. I was teaching 5th graders. And there's no better human to spend the day with than a 10-year-old. They don't take themselves so seriously, and they've got great senses of humor. And I had everything. I had all the resources. I had the respect of the parents and the teachers, great boss, and I was miserable. I was miserable in this work, because I knew it wasn't, somehow I didn't feel important enough. This one Sunday, it was in November, for some reason I was enraged. I was completely angry. It had been all Sunday afternoon and into the evening, and now I was going into the bathroom, and I looked at this guy in the mirror, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and I hated this guy. I hated it. His hair was falling out. His skin hadn't completely recovered from adolescence. It was sort of, you know, both of these liabilities were still there. And I hadn't figured out what it was I was going to do in the world. And so I'm looking at this image and I'm thinking, you miserable fool, you have no idea. And I took my fist and I hit myself right in the cheek. I couldn't believe it. I hauled back and I went, boom! And I hit myself and my eyes went,
in the sockets, and this sting and smell of iron in my sinuses, and my face was kind of going like that, and I said, damn, I hit myself. And just to show it was no mistake, I hit myself 3 more times. I went boom, 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 like that.
As a non-believer.
That's right. And then I was tired. I was tired of slugging myself, and my whole face was ringing. And I was still furious, but I'd pounded most of the venom out of myself, and then this roach came up on the mirror. And the roach had that sheen, that brown sheen to its exoskeleton, and its antennae were kind of scanning around. And that roach became the metaphor for my life. That was the icon of failure, that roach. Slowly I reached up into the cabinet. I was going to kill the roach. I was going to kill my life. I was going to kill that 2-room apartment that I was living in that small potatoes gig. I reached up into the cabinet and I put my fingers around a family-size tube of Crest toothpaste. And I brought it slowly out of the cabinet so I didn't scare the roach. And I went, "Ugh!" And I buried this tube of toothpaste into the mirror, and of course the roach went bing like that, just onto the medicine cabinet shelf, and I went, "Ugh!" And I started pawing at the shells, and they busted out, and they were glass, and the door popped out of the medicine cabinet, and the roach went over onto the wall. And then I chased him across the wall, and I was cursing and saying, "Die, die!" And of course the roach, very nimbly, and that's why they've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, he disappeared. He just vaporized. I look for cuts on my hand, and I piece the medicine cabinet back together, and I go into the bedroom, which is the other room, right? And I get into bed, and I start writing in the journal. And as I write in the journal, all that venom starts to vent into the journal. I was putting my doubts and my anger into the journal, and I drew these murderous self-portraits of myself. I drew these pictures, and one picture I'm lying there with this big dagger in my heart, and I'm laying there, and there's a lit bomb at my head, and I was so frustrated at the confusion, at not knowing what I was supposed to do. I was 31, and I had no idea. I woke up the next morning and I said, I actually went insane. I snapped last night. And I was so afraid of going mad over this issue that I actually started to address the fear, that the fear of going mad over the search became larger than the fear of change. So I began taking a look. For the next 18 months, whenever I had free time, I started looking around, read, took workshops, made lists and things, and it turned out, after 18 months of searching and all these workshops, that I wanted to be a storyteller. It turned out that that's what I wanted to do. I was thinking about this story and just so thankful that I'm in this brotherhood, and I found this niche of storytelling and this work of telling in the greater world. And I thought I'd go back and look in my journal at these portraits, because I remember them quite vividly. And I wanted to see how murderous they were and how desperate I was. And I remembered the desperation fairly accurately. But what amazed me was that these portraits of myself, I had to leaf through 15 pages, 15 journal pages to get to the space where these portraits were. And on 14 of the 15 pages of the ones that I went through to get to write down the journal were stories I had written down that I had heard and loved. And so there I was all the while. I had right in front of me, in the darkest confusion, I had right in front of me in this journal the answer for who I was and what I wanted to do.
So how long did it take you to get to the sense where story became a reality for you? How long after that time?
Well, within that school year, there was this faculty talent show, and it was to be aired in the evening, and the parents, it was a fundraiser for the school, and the parents were invited to come by and see this thing. And I had heard a joke that I really liked about maybe 10, 15 years earlier. And I turned the joke into a story with sound effects to present at this, exactly. It was the truck driver story. And I had a microphone. I set a chair on top of a table in the cafeteria and put the microphone in front of me and went through all the gear changes, and I was amazed at how much occurred to me in the first telling of that story.
I think of the first story I ever told. The first story I ever told was preschool kids in a library, and I told 3 Billy Goats Gruff.
What did you tell Ray?
3 Billy Goats Gruff. And I got to the point where the troll comes out from under to the bridge, and I said, and the troll said, "I'm going to eat you up." And this little 3-year-old girl puts up her hand and says, "Gobbled them up."
Always a critic.
I couldn't, and it was, if you looked at the text of the story, it was gobbled, but in my mind, I just substituted eat. So I learned from that time on, don't ever tell a story that somebody else knows.
That's a good lesson.
Well, that's the flip side of Bill's experience, though, when you have your first really bad bomb. Because you've had this long line of successes, and then you step out on stage, and if you're going to make a living at this, if you're pushing yourself at all, you're going to fail sometimes. And that first time when you walk out and it's a disaster, and you're dying, and you're looking at your watch, you're only 5 minutes into the program, and already you're dead. And no, I think that's where the heart of the storyteller really gets forged, because you learn to go right on through it, and then when you come out on the other side, you have a little more compassion for people who are on stage, and it's just not. And you can be philosophical and say, you know what, it wasn't the right time or the right place for that story.
Or the right audience.
Or the right audience.
I had once been booked into a senior citizen home, okay?
Yeah.
And they wheel people out in wheelchairs, and they're sitting there in wheelchairs, and this woman, I'm telling the flight of the Spielkammerad, and this woman there is like this. And she suddenly goes, and I think she has died. Really died. So I hurry up the story. I want to tell somebody. And right before the end, so I knew that,
You resuscitated.
I resuscitated.
You obviously, Bill, seem to feel that storytelling is your calling, per se.
I'd say it's true.
What's that?
I'd say that's true.
Yeah. I'm just curious about the rest of you.
To me, storytelling, everything is the story. and I don't ever think about whether I'm good at it or bad at it. I just know that that's what I was meant to do. And so whether I'm a good storyteller or a bad storyteller doesn't really make that much difference to me. I just know that telling stories is the way to communicate for me.
But Ray, you are very lucky then, because getting back to finding your passion, you found your passion very early on. This is something that most people really struggle with, just to build it. My daughter is so upset with herself because she hasn't found that passion where some of her friends have. And that is such a rewarding thing, man, to know that what you're doing is something that you were meant to do.
Do you encourage then her finding her passion?
Oh, I'd love to have her find her passion, but I can't say, well, your passion is this, because I don't know what her passion would be. But
Well, you model that for her, though, in the way you live. She can see your joy, and one of the things Dick and I have talked about is this idea that maybe one of the greatest benefits of having guys like us going around to schools and being around kids is to show them what it looks like when somebody's found their bliss and somebody's found their passion and followed it wherever it took them.
I just have enjoyed this conversation so much, and I wanted to say that I would guess that maybe you guys might know that storytelling is not easy for me. It's very difficult. And I suppose the reason I like to tell stories, I thought a lot about this. The reason I like to tell stories is because I enjoy hearing them so much. And I just revel in hearing all you guys. I love your stories. I just appreciate our get-together because I like to hear you telling your stories. It just fires me up. And so I think,
that is the beauty of this get-together, really. I mean, listening to all the stories and just rapping and sharing. These guys.
So that's why I like to tell children's stories, for the most part children, because I like listening to stories myself.
The next time. Did we ever do this?
No.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Okay. T-I-O. 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 And then in the center. A little bit faster. T-I-O. T-I-O. T-I-O.
And that's what the sweat is about for me. Again, it's one of those drum beats as the year goes round for me. And it's similar. And I don't want it to be the same because life is not the same. It's not a circle, it's a spiral. We go around spirals and we come back to a similar point, but it's changed. And it's in allowing the structure to be created again with plenty of room for play. We set up a playing field there at the sweat. And then whatever happens during our time on that playing field, that's the game. That's the joy of the chance, of the spontaneity of life.
And she suddenly goes, and I think she has died. Really died. So I hurry up the story.
And my father looked at me and he said, that was what I was always afraid of.
And I took my fist and I hit myself right in the cheek. I couldn't believe it. I hauled back and I went, boom! And I hit myself and my eyes went in the sockets.
Accidentally, we smashed your tea set. Oh, and we felt so badly. We wanted to kill ourselves. So the only thing we could think of was that poison. So we ate the poison and we're waiting to die.
When I was in the Peace Corps, we used to eat this chocolate pudding, and I loved it. It was so good, and it was just, you know, made by people that lived in the country. And I would eat it all the time until finally I asked somebody, what is this? And they said, oh, that's bean paste.
I looked at this kind of interesting guy standing there, and I thought, seemed kind of shaky to me. And I was just taking the hook out of the lower jaw when I made the mistake of looking that fish in the eye. He looked up at me like this.